A generic model like chat can't really help me unless it can learn all of my environments. I think speed matters more now than it's ever mattered in the past. It's not something people think a lot about when they think about building AI. When they're using AI, they don't think about it ever.
Welcome to Money Mavericks, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of finance, investment, and entrepreneurship.
I'm Kirk Drake.
And I'm Daryl Hicks. Together, we're here to bring you the latest insights, expert opinions from the trailblazers who are redefining success in the financial world.
Yeah, a big challenge for when ChatGPT came out is like prompt engineering all of a sudden became like the wave. Everyone needs to learn how to write better prompts, which I would argue has been one of the great boons for humanity because, as was said before, the cliche, you can answer all the questions in the universe, all the problems in the universe, all the secrets of the universe can be exposed to you if you know how to ask the right question, right? So how to ask better questions and how to formulate better questions and how to think logically and intentionally and from a first principles perspective, what am I really trying to solve for here? And how can I really craft the right question and think deeply? One of my favorite prompts with the LLMs is always to say, ask me clarifying questions before you give me the answer. And it's so good with oh man, now I hadn't really thought about that.
And every time I skip that step or take a shortcut and just ask a short question, I'm infinitely disappointed in the answer. And then I'm like, oh, it's your own dumb fault. You try to take a shortcut. You got to give it the context. You gotta dive into it.
This is where agents are going to go a long way, right? Because the reliance on us to write prompts, that'll be gone soon. Yeah. The agents are going to do the prompting, right? But
you can see with GPT 5.0, it's already doing that a bit where, it takes a lot longer though, right? I find I'd rather write a good prompt in 4.0 than a short prompt in 5.0 and wait 5 minutes for it to figure its shit out.
It's definitely getting slower. But it's doing better. Right? It also still needs to do a better job dealing with unstructured data. If you give it, I was messing around with it today just for some records transactions that I had that I wanted to summarize, but I had them in 3 different file formats. So I gave them all 3 and I was like, hey, put these together. I want the transactions for the month of August, break it down by category. And it was just horrible at that. It's kind of funny because it gives you an answer and it's like, here you go. And you can see it smiling, It's like, oh, that's not right. And it's like, oh, right. That wasn't right. I was like, you don't even know, you're just agreeing with me now.
Right.
and then I'm like, hey, can you do this? And it's like, okay, I just did it. Download the file. I was like, there's no file there. And it's like, oh, you're right. I can't actually do that. So I'm going to show you how to do that in Photoshop. I was like,
I did have one the other day that blew my mind. I was working on a project and I had an architect, a financial model that was 10 or 12 tabs deep in a spreadsheet, very complicated, spent maybe 40 hours perfecting this model to analyze those different scenarios. And then 6 months had gone by and I needed to update something. And I went back to the original prompt and just asked a couple questions and it spit out a spreadsheet that was, basically 2/3 of the model that I had built the first try in about 2 minutes. And I was like, holy crap, this thing just leveled up, right?
I remember having a conversation with you, Aaron, about some of the irritations that I had with the LLMs and why they keep forgetting things that I was telling it. And especially if it was a really long, meandering thread, I had this impression that even though I explicitly told the LLM, the GPT, don't forget these things as we have this conversation, the further and deeper we got into the conversation, it started to forget those things. And I'd have to go back and remind it. And you took me down a really interesting rabbit hole on RAG index, which for any of the listeners who want to know more about this, go ask your favorite LLM what a RAG index, like an RAG, it's an acronym. But just for the listeners at a high level, what are some of the weaknesses and the limitations in RAG? And how do we first, what is it and why does it present weaknesses? And then maybe if we have time, we can talk about ways that we can kind of mitigate some of those weaknesses.
Yeah, so RAG, retrieval augmented generation, the notion here with RAG is that you give it a whole bunch of information and then you ask it questions and then it uses the information you gave it to answer your questions. The challenge with RAG is depending on how long the index is and the structure of it, in order for it to access it, it actually has to read all of it, figure out what parts of that are relevant to the question that you're asking, and then try to regurgitate an answer out to you. And I think it's like something like 10%. It's like it uses either the
Mhm.
bottom or the top 10%. So the older the information in a RAG index, the less likely it is to be used. Now, you can trick it and you could do better by giving it structured data. So a really great example of a really good RAG index is like question answer pairs, right? Where let's just say you're a customer service chat agent and you've got a list of 1,000 questions that your customers ask and the perfect answer, and you give the LLM that in a structured way. It's much better at dealing with that because it's structured. It's not trying to, read all the text and figure it all out. So like that's a really good example of how to use a RAG index. A less good example is like, I've got this, chat history in GPT, and now I'm going to ask it to remember something in that history. Like I was using it the other day working on iterating on some new company ideas. And I've got like 4 or 5 different ideas and they were all in there. And I said to it, hey, what would a one pager look like for an investor for this idea? Well, instead of going to the last idea, it went to like the first idea and then gave me the answer. And I was like, oh, no, not that one. And I realized, well, I've got all this context in the history because I didn't create new sections for each. And it couldn't deal with it. Now, have you guys played around with memories at all?
No.
Yeah. So memories is a potential solution to these things. Memories is a fairly new feature. I think it's in 5, and it'll actually begin to
In
create
ChatGPT 5?
in chat. Yeah, I believe what it's doing behind the scenes is it's using like a knowledge base or some type of a knowledge base that allows it to actually index the information that's being stored, and then it can recall it. So it could like learn more about you or learn more about the thing you're trying to do, and then use that.
Oh, wait. Like, so when I notice, for example, like when I tell something to ChatGPT and then I say, please remember this, I get this little notification and it's like adding to stored memory or something like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's actually a separate thing you have to enable because I got like a thing like, hey, do you want to enable memories? And then there was like all these terms and conditions that you had to agree to. And I took a look at those and I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do that yet because it grabs access to email and all those things. So check out memories. But it's one of the areas that I think there's an awful lot of domain for the future is like, how do you create ability to deal with unstructured data and store it and use it in a way that helps customers or helps the user get that data back when they want it back and can learn about the environments that it's operating in.
It's really interesting because the way I'm not sure I understood this about how it was working. So the way I had kind of solved this in some goofy way was I would create multiple GPTs, and then each GPT would produce an output that I would copy, save, and paste into the next one, and they'd be cumulative so that by the time I got 10 deep, there'd be 10 documents, which would create that kind of institutional memory right in there, and found it, I could build upon itself in that mode. But if I tried to do it all in one GPT or chat, I would just get inevitably frustrated with it. And I've shown this to a number of people and they're like, oh, it's really cool, but I couldn't explain why it worked. I was just like, this is how I figured out how to solve that. So
and it's just one of those things you just shouldn't have to do that. Right. Like we should just build something that's like a knowledge base. And I think even more importantly, if you give it data, all of that data goes into these public models. Like, how do you feel about that? Right. Like, I had a friend that like took they did one of those like DNA sequencing things, like the thing. And then they put all that data into chat and said, hey, give me a vitamin plan. I was like, dude, you gave that thing all of
I've done that and I don't care. Yeah. I'm like, whatever. Like, do what you want with my DNA. Like, have fun. Right. Like,
some people don't care. Like, in financial statements. I don't know where else it goes, but like,
I assume someone's got it anyways. So like, whatever.
People are there's all kinds of differences of spectrum. I think the key though is like for people to be aware and educated on what's actually happening here. And I think a lot of people are being maybe overly naive in what they do go and share. I mean, there's features inside of ChatGPT, for example, where you can opt out. By default, it's enabled, but you can opt out and say, don't use my information to train like in the public models. But even that, like, how secure is that really? I mean, I don't really know.
The argument I've had with a number of financial institutions is, okay, so let me understand this. The data you're interested in protected is all sitting on Microsoft Office 365, right? Yeah. Okay. And Microsoft owns half of ChatGPT. Yeah. So your concern is that Microsoft's not going to train on your data, but ChatGPT is, right? Like, where are we drawing this like line of somehow logical framework around who is and who isn't? The reality is, if someone's they're going to, right? And if it's a corporate entity or ChatGPT or someone else, it's a huge risk to them in any way. The same reason you started at the beginning of what Amazon and Google and those guys can't do. And either we believe that free market is going to essentially, accomplish that, or we don't. And not that you shouldn't still have limits or pay attention to it, but at some point it's like this insanity of arguments of, of how we're getting there.
I mostly agree. There's definitely, and this is just more personal perspective. There's definitely some companies that I trust more than others.
Sure.
Right. And I probably worry less about them using my data to train things and more about the data leaking out there.
Yeah.
Right. Like, my genome ends up in the hands of my health insurance provider.
Right.
And now they know that I'm prone to something.
Right.
That freaks me out.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So
they already deny everything. What's going to be different?
I know.
True. I want to come back to something that we were talking about earlier, though. Like the first time you were walking me through like a RAG index and how it works, we talked a lot about how when you're putting information into an LLM, for example, it's not actually affecting the weights on the back end, because that's really expensive to go into these GPUs and like retrain a model and all this. So like a RAG index is a shortcut, and it's not perfect. It's only going to use the bottom 10% or the top 10%. And if you've got too much data in there, it starts to get a little bit lost. And the models are getting better and trying to keep like, what's the 10% most relevant thing, and try to get that right in order to answer your question properly. But you had identified that as being like a hole that existed in the market. We talked about another hole with synthetic data, but what other holes do you see out there with these tools right now that you think really need to be filled in the market? Is that one of them, like having a private LLM where you can actually influence the weights? Or
yeah, I think it is. And I think that, the technology is evolving there. Amazon's got some stuff now that they're talking about making it so that weights can be adjusted. I think DeepSeek, might be on a similar path. I'm not positive on that, but the technology is getting to the point that the weights of a model will be able to be adjusted in a less expensive way than it's been typically. Maybe not a model to the size of ChatGPT, but maybe a smaller model, like the models that could run on your laptop. So
and what would be the value of one of those smaller models? Like, what would be the purpose for it?
Privacy for sure, right? Like everything can stay local. Like,
what features and functionality am I going to be missing? And like my assumption is that a smaller model that's running privately on my laptop is going to not be as powerful in some way, or am I off base there?
I think there's two things. One, there's a situation where like it's super frustrating when they update the model, and your GPT was based on 4.0 or 3.0, and suddenly it starts producing wildly different results. So the ability from a corporate setting or a personal setting to lock it down at a particular load, so that when you're upgrading or doing something like that, you have some control over it. The privacy piece, I think, is key. And then I suspect there's some cost piece of like, I can control the cost having to run locally on my laptop versus, going off and, burning down 4 forests to figure out my plane flights, right? Like,
yep, that's right. Like Llama, run Llama locally. Like you can do an awful lot with that, and at essentially no cost. It's an open source model.
And certainly anything illegal that you want to do.
Yeah.
Not that we're advocating for that.
Privacy.
No, I'm just saying that that's where my brain goes. If I want to commit fraud, I'm not going to do it in a public setting, right?
Yeah. So I think there's an awful lot of green space around that. Gaming it local data much faster. I think the other opportunity with those models is, you have what we've done today, call it memories, call it RAG indexes. But if you actually have a way to make it easier to create question answer pairs, or to create indexed, I'll call them index RAGs. We call them knowledge bases, like we was just referred to them as knowledge bases. But think of it as like an actual database that's your RAG index, as opposed to a whole bunch of unstructured stuff. So actually, putting it in a way that's indexed and weighted, and now you can actually go in there and say, oh, this thing that I told you before is wrong. I want to remove that. So now when I ask questions, it's no longer included. It'd be really hard, like at least the way I use chat, it'd be really hard for me to go through all of my context in a single window. What Kirk's doing makes a lot of sense. Like I have one for this, I have one for this, I have one for this. I try to do that, but ultimately you lose track, and I, just get turned around. So, how do you make it easy to go in and begin to edit and adjust things that are in there? How do I remove some
personal prompts that you've come up with that have like saved you a ton of time personally, or just my favorite use case that I've ever come up with is my surprise date night generator, where I put in a bunch of information about my wife, and then it spits out date night ideas, and then you pick one, and it'll actually plan the event, the entire date. You can tell it to do the short version that you can execute in 15 minutes, or the 6-month version where it's, order thing, get them all ready, and you can do this. And it's unbelievably effective. The first time we got in the car, she's like, this playlist is awesome. I'm like, yeah, it is.
I love it. No, actually, I've been a surprisingly light user of chat, but just because I've been like,
Right.
been so busy working, building that I haven't really used it a ton. So most of my really good prompts I get from Daryl, but I almost, there's probably three things that I do regularly that I think help a lot. Is one, I always give it context before I ask a question. So I'll say something like, hey, I'm about to ask you to do this thing.
Right.
I'm going to give you 4 files, right? One's going to be in US dollars. The next 2 are going to be in Canadian dollars. And I'm going to ask you to prepare an analysis. And then it says, go, great. Now then I give it the files. And then I do the same thing. I was like, hey, if you have questions, ask, don't just make stuff. So I've been doing that an awful lot, and it's worked really, really well. So giving it the context up front, I found really helpful. The other thing I've done an awful lot of is image generation. Like, I love generating images. Like, I was doing this LinkedIn post, and I was like, oh man, my wife happens to be a pretty good image. She's like really good at Illustrator and all that, but she, ultimately gets annoyed when I ask her about these things all the time. So I just started like making my own images. I was like, I'll just ask Dolly and have it make an image. It was lousy at it at first. Like, it took me probably an hour to get the prompts right. And then what I found I had to do was give it some source imagery. Like, I want these green vans with TSO on the heel, because they were like a big part of our company priority proposition. So I had to keep giving it more, and then it would get it right partially, and then would get the other part wrong. So I finally just gave it like a full set of prompts. Like, okay, here's the 6 things that it needs to do, and here's the 3 things you've done wrong the last 4 times. Don't do those wrong things again. And then it apologized and got better.
I feel like ChatGPT's Canadian or something.
It must be.
It's very polite.
It can be a little sycophantic by times, a little too obsequious for me.
Every once in a while, I think to myself, if you worked for me, I'd fire you. It's like, you're really freaking annoying. It's like, I've asked you 4 times that I don't want high top sneakers in the picture. Like, why do you keep giving me high top sneakers?
Right. What is wrong with you?
I wanted to ask you, you talked about the really incredible talent that was available at Amazon. And I remember you talking a lot and just praising some of these AI engineers. What are some of the, like, what we say, the top 3 the traits that separated, the top Amazon AI engineers from kind of the rest of the pack? I think one of them you already alluded to when you talked about curiosity, how deeply that was embedded into the culture at Amazon. But maybe there's another 3 outside of curiosity. But what would you say, like, what are the top traits in your experience when you look at the best people on your team?
On Money Mavericks, we don't just talk about making money. We explore the innovative strategies and bold decisions that drive real change. Whether you're an experienced investor, a budding entrepreneur, or just someone looking to make smarter financial choices, we've got something for you.
Every week, we're going to sit down with industry leaders, visionaries, and mavericks who share their journeys, challenges, and breakthroughs, from contrarian views on market trends to the secrets behind building a successful startup. You get an inside look at what it takes to thrive in today's economy.
And we promise to keep it real, engaging, and most importantly, actionable. No jargon, no fluff. Just straightforward conversations that you can apply to your own financial journey.
So get ready to challenge your thinking, expand your knowledge, and take control of your financial future. This is Money Mavericks,
where we turn financial dreams into realities and mavericks into legends.
First thing is, like, I don't get to work with a lot of not good engineers, right? So like, it's a little bit hard to say these are so much better than, others, because like, we really only kept the good ones and fostered it. And if you get to that level of an engineer, you've probably been in Amazon for 15 years, 12 years, 13 years. So you're pretty well baked. But there's probably 3 traits that I'm just super grateful for that these engineers have. One is curiosity. Like, they're always looking at other things. 2, they're like bees running from hive to hive, right? So if you've got, there's just thousands of internal teams, and all of these teams are innovating and learning new things. And our best engineers, especially our principal engineers, are going across all those hives and learning from them so that they don't have to relearn on their own, and they're sharing knowledge and ideas. And then the last thing is, and this is the one I'm probably most grateful for, is they'll prototype something in a weekend. Like, they'll leave work on a Friday. I'll put a seed in their brain of something that I think would be cool. And then they show up on Monday and like, here it is. And the ones that do that, I'm just endeared to them for forever. Like, I just love that mentality.
It's a great interview question too, of like, hey, tell me something you prototype quickly.
Yeah.
And like I feel like you get great answers. And that was always my service one, was like, tell me a time you helped someone you didn't need to. And about a third of the time, the person's like, I've never done that. You're like, you're not going to be so good at this role.
Yeah. That was a very Amazon style interview question too. Everything starts, tell me about a time.
Yeah.
Are there any benchmarks that you think that you'd like to retire, or any that you think we should keep?
Any benchmarks? Well, I don't know if this would qualify as a benchmark, but any programmer that doesn't want to use AI to program, just let them go. Just get rid of them. Like honestly, you're at such a disadvantage. And if there's an executive that's like, oh, I'm not going to use AI in my company, or a sales leader that's, not using AI to do pipeline analytics and some of those things because they want to do it the way they've always done it. Like, I'm sorry, like, please go. I think there's no good reason for that. So I think that's one for sure, is like, the status quo is gone. It's all new. Be hands-on, get into it, figure it out, learn how this is going to make you a force multiplier, and then force multiply. So I think that's probably one that's top of mind for me.
And I know I'm monopolizing the questions here, but I really had a couple I wanted to ask. Feel free to interrupt me anytime, Kirk. But I know you're thinking a lot about what's next. Like, Aaron's not done. Aaron's not going to retire. We all know that. I can't wait. I know a lot of people can't wait to see what it is that you do next. But I'd love to hear your thinking. There's this thesis out there where, all the base models are going to kind of commoditize. So where do you see the moat in building a business in that space? Like, is it around eval data? Is it around like retrieval telemetry? Is it workflow IP? Like, where do you think you could actually build a really successful business in AI with a good moat today?
I've been having this conversation with myself almost every night before I go to sleep. I'm actually not sure that a moat is as important now as it used to be. I think speed matters more now than it's ever mattered in the past, right? Like, there's an Amazon saying like speed matters disproportionately. Like, these solutions need to get out there. We've got to fail fast. We've got to get out there and really innovate and get technology in the hands of customers so that our customers can help tell us what works, what doesn't work, what they like and what they don't like. And I think with AI, it's even more prescient than ever before. I think the technology is changing so fast.
Speed and adaptability.
Speed and adaptability becomes the most important aspect. Can we create a technological moat? Maybe, but if you do, the technology might leapfrog it by the time you actually get a product out to market. I'm sort of sharing like early stage thinking. I've not thought super deeply about this yet or asked any experts.
Well, it's an interesting reverse question of that is like, if using AI today, would Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple been able to create the moats in the first place?
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know. I feel like the speed of which you'd have to do that is so much faster today.
I think it's also one of the reasons that you're seeing so much investment in the large cloud providers and models. Investments in Anthropic, investments in OpenAI. Like, these models will commoditize at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think we end up with one big AI winner, the way we have one big smartphone winner and one big corporate software winner, one big search winner, right? Like
Visa and MasterCard, who own like almost all the payments.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question. I think no. I mean, in the fullness of time, maybe. Like, but we
don't have a big internet winner. I mean, like, if you look at it that way, right? Like, technology.
In the next 5 or 10 years, I think there's going to be an awful lot of models. I also toil with this question on purpose-fit solutions versus generic solutions. Chat is a really good generic solution. I've actually been thinking, so I took almost 3 months off, and I was like just thinking about stuff, which was pretty awesome. And I also happened to be on a boat for a big chunk of time. And I started asking ChatGPT questions about my boat. ChatGPT knows nothing about my boat, right? A generic model in chat can't really help me. It can help me generically, but it doesn't know that I've got a specific. There's just so many things. So I was like, for like a unique environment, whether it's a boat or a new house or something else, a generic model like chat can't really help me unless it can learn all of my environment. So when I think about the opportunities, it's like, how do you make it really easy to get data in to a model, make sure that data can be indexed in a way that the model can operate on it and not forget things here and there. And then allow users to ask questions about it. And I think that's really interesting. Like, I was talking to somebody the other day about Google Glasses, which I've never actually put on, but I was like, how cool would it be if I could use that as an input source to a model? And then you play that in, it's okay. One of the other techniques that is pretty common out there is ensemble modeling. Have you guys heard about ensemble modeling? So
Yeah.
ensemble modeling, just to be brief, is like you put the same information into a couple different models, you look at the answers, you look for convergence, and then in order to eliminate hallucination or mistakes in a model, you can use that to kind of refine it down. It's also a really great technique for using more cost-effective models. So like if you've got one model that costs you, 3 cents and another one that costs you 10, well, you can hit the 10-cent model for the refined answer, but the 3-cent model for for the big bulk generic stuff. So like I think there's some really cool opportunities to be like, okay, how do we make it easier to get data in? And then how do we create an ensemble across multiple models, kind of leading us down this path of will there just be one winner or will there be multiple? Maybe at some point, but I think there's still some benefits to the ensemble modeling there.
I would love at some point to be able to trust an LLM, like a private one, that I could just give it access to everything. And like you said, to make it easy, where it's like all of my journaling that I've done in Notion and Evernote and all of my email, like I have all of my email saved in Gmail since like the 1990s. And, all of my, text message cloud and like all this like really deeply personal and private information. And just to be able to like train it all and then have it know me really well. And then to be able to soundboard, I could see all kinds of practical things. Like I just ran into this person. I can't remember them. Where do I know them from? And give me like, all the context and like the last interactions that we had and like some of the jumping off opportunities that we might have for being able to work together, right? That would be super valuable for me to be able to have that quickly on the fly.
I love that idea. I actually thought for a few minutes about building something like that. And then I was like, well, Apple should really build that. Like they've already got all that stuff. It's already in my phone. They've got all my text messages and my history, and I kind of trust them. And, like that to me is a really cool use case for a company like Apple or a big company to solve. And I think it will. Like if you've seen Mantis AI,
no,
they raised a pile of money and they built like an agent, and they just recently, like maybe 6-7 months ago, made it available in beta. And that's sort of the idea. It's like, it gets to know you, it's your personal thing. And I think there'll be a few more of those that come out, but ultimately, I'd want Apple to do that. Like I'm pretty comfortable with Apple knowing stuff about me. I think that'll probably be solved in foreseeable future.
I hope so. It'd be really powerful.
And again, sorry, but a primitive that you need to build that is the ability to deal with unstructured data, right? It all comes down to like this really simple thing. And it's like, I've got data in all these different formats and all these different providers, and I don't want to have to write 800 API integrations. I don't want my agents to have to write all these different API integrations. You're going to get some of these things don't even have API, like your Gmail from the 90s. I can't imagine. I'd love to look through that. Like,
I was so disappointed. I tried to take all my like Google Fit data, Samsung Health, Orange Theory workouts, and like figure out something of that. It was brutal, right?
Yeah.
Like the lack of ability to export it into anything intelligent and make sense of it, and then the stuff you could export with these massive files of garbage, right? Like, so it's.
Yeah.
I
actually, it's funny you mentioned that, Kirk. I actually wrote working back, like, so one of the things we always did at Amazon, we have these documents where we work backwards from the customer. So you start with a pain point, you work backwards, and it's a really awesome way to just get ideas out on paper. And I actually had this idea a while ago. I had the same thing you did. I was like, I want my Peloton data, my Fitbit data, my heart. I want all of the, and I want my Apple Health data. I want it all to sync up, and then I want to be able to run algorithms against it, or nowadays AI against it, and have it do diagnostics. Like, can it tell me predictively, am I going to twist my ankle? Am I going to, if I have some device inside my body monitoring something, whether it's a pacemaker.
You ate an apple on Thursday and you're going to you're only going to run, half as fast on Friday. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, man, this would be really awesome. And I actually floated the idea around it, some really smart people, and they're like, you'll get so hung up in the privacy and the ability to share. Like Apple Health Kit is supposed to be the answer for this, but I actually thought about building a company just to do that because I was so intrigued by it, and I was like, oh man, do I really want to be dealing with privacy, consent, and sharing HIPAA data? Like
HIPAA plus privacy plus security.
It's a startup killer. Yeah.
Well, as somebody who's built a business in a very heavily regulated industry in financial services, I can tell you that there is a lot of pain with it, but there's also a lot of advantage because once you figure it out, that's where you have a moat.
Well, now you have
it is so painful.
You have regulatory capture and no one else is kind of.
Anyway, Aaron, we could keep going for at least another hour. I love this. And there's a bunch of other themes that I was kind of hoping we could tap into that we didn't quite get a chance to, but this was still super fun and I think really, really valuable. So Thanks for making the time. Where can people keep tabs on what's next in Aaron Rallo's world?
LinkedIn is a decent spot. I do tend to use that a fair bit. Recently started a podcast called I Wonder. It's just my wife and I created a bunch of episodes. Every time our kids said, I wonder what those white trails are that come out behind airplanes are. So we just made little episodes. So I'm going to be doing more of that. So we got a small company called Curious Minds Media, and we're just putting podcast episodes out there on Spotify and Apple Podcast and stuff like that. So you can keep track of me there. But LinkedIn is always the best.
Amazing. Good stuff. And I know you're really passionate about helping kids too. So there's going to be, I'm sure, some fun stuff jumping off of that. But thanks again, buddy. Super great to have you here with us. And hopefully we'll get you back for a round 2 at some point in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you both. Really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Money Mavericks. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it.
Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for exclusive resources, episode transcripts, and more.
Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, making smart moves, and turning your financial dreams into realities.
You've been listening to Money Mavericks, where Mavericks become legends.